Right Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, heads of government institutions, development partners, senior leaders in government, colleagues, plus NISR staff who are here. It's my pleasure this morning to share with you the findings of the EICV7, which I'm sure we have all been waiting for. And the slides will be in 4 parts. I want to bring some introduction for all of us to probably be a little more familiar with what this survey is about, what it aims to capture. Then I also want to share the context in which we did this survey, because well-being of people is so correlated or dependent on how the economy is doing, on how different aspects of the economy like employment, job opportunities are. Then obviously share with you the findings and offer some few conclusions and reflections. So as Anangwe just touched on it, the EICV is the main tool, the main survey that helps to measure poverty and other socio-economic indicators. It's the main survey in any country that is very holistic in nature, captures so many things, and it's a huge survey that covers the whole country with over 15,000 households sampled. But more importantly, I want to underline 2 things about the uniqueness of this survey. One is that it is done throughout the whole year, and there's a reason to that. We want to see the various variations in how people's livings are. For example, for those who depend on agriculture, what they earn, how they live during harvest, when they have harvested, might be different from when they are out of harvest. So it's very important to see all those seasons of the year. The other second thing is, we visit households 5 times. That's very unique. There's no other survey where we have to visit the household several times. We do that because we want as much as possible to understand various dynamics. The approach of the survey is that we look at what people's consumption is. That consumption could be what they have purchased. It could be what they have got from their farms. It could even be what they've been offered to. So we want to have a full picture. We have a diary which we give the households and guide them through to record all those details. And that's very important. We do it every 3 years, and we follow international and regional standards. And this is very critical. It's not just something Rwanda does, it's something that's done across the whole world, and we have to follow those international standards. Now, this is the historic of the survey. As you can see, we started sometime in 2001. That's the first time we did the survey, this particular survey. At the time, we were doing it every 5 years, 2001, 2006, 11. But then at some point, the government felt it was important to actually do it more regular, every 3 years. Why? Because there was a whole focus on improving well-being of people. And so there was a need to see more regular numbers. Now, that's unique to Rwanda. Most countries, especially in Africa, can only afford to do this survey maybe every 6 years or 5 years. Now, when it came to 2020, we were not able to complete the survey because of COVID. As you all know, there were those restrictions. And given how rigorous the survey is, we were not able to continue to go in households. However, we had a high-level report which showed some of the key indicators. We published that report, but we were not able to measure poverty. So we had to wait for the next cycle, EICV7. And in this cycle of EICV7, we had the opportunity to make some changes, improvements. And these improvements were partly informed, one, by recent changes in methodology at international level, plus also the efforts of harmonization at regional level. And these are things which have been reviewed over the years, which were timely for us to adapt. The second main reason was Rwandans, the way of their life has changed. I'll give some few examples. Way back in 2001, we had more people maybe involved in agriculture. But over the years, we see that there are shifts of people moving from agriculture. So we needed to reflect that. Also, given that a number of people in urban areas, their way of their day-to-day life, eating in restaurants, is something we need to capture. We do not only ask what people have consumed in households, we want also to reflect what they have consumed even out of the households. The other key thing which happened from 2019, we had the school feeding program, a major program that is undertaken in all public schools. And so we wanted also to capture that information. If children are fed in schools, what does that mean for households? So the international improvements plus a reflection of various changes in the way Rwandans live were very paramount for us to adapt. Now, I want to acknowledge some key people here. In these kinds of improvements, we work closely with experts. We've worked with most of you, nutrition experts across various institutions, World Health Organization, UNICEF, World Food Program, Ministry of Health, RBC, to understand the different aspects of people's well-being, but also the World Bank. The World Bank was so critical in helping us internalize and adapt these methodologies. And one of the representatives from the World Bank will be speaking after me. So with that, what was the context? Because context matters. Before we go into results, it matters for us to understand what the context was in Rwanda. Over the last 10 years, when we look at the period 2014 to 2024, one, we see that GDP has been growing steadily, except for around COVID, where we had this decrease in GDP. But other than that, we've had a steady growth in GDP with an average of about 7%. So if GDP is growing, if the economy is growing, is that growth reaching people? And the next line here shows that when we look at household consumption, we see that household consumption has also steadily been increasing. It's in line with GDP growth. What that says is that GDP growth, or the economy doing well, reaches people as well. And that's very important, because it could be a situation where the economy grows, but that growth is not reaching people. So that's one way to look at it. And when we talk of growth of the economy, it so matters to know how agriculture has been doing. And the average growth for agriculture has been about 4%. Now, there are years where we had negative growth for agriculture, or almost zero. And so when you do the average, that's how you come to 4%. But more important, in the last year, 2024, we had a growth of 5%, which matters. Agriculture matters because most people, for their consumption, it's about food. If food is available, people will have more to consume, prices will be stable, that reflects in their well-being. And speaking of prices, prices are very key. What you see is that the inflation has been going up over the years. But when you look at the period EICV5, we had from a low inflation to a high inflation, and that indeed came out in the numbers at the time when we did poverty. We didn't see much change in poverty at the time. But around this period, EICV7, we were coming from high inflation, and then inflation went down. There was stable inflation. Inflation was about to an average of 3.9%. Inflation matters because if prices are high, it erodes the capacities of people, and it matters in terms of their well-being. So we're talking of a period, the ACV7, when we're doing the data collection, we had recovered from COVID, where growth happened, where production of agriculture improved, and so we had stable prices. Those are the economic conditions we're going by. I also wanted to share something key here. If the economy is growing, where is that growth coming from? One way to think about it is private sector. Are businesses being established? And if businesses are being established, are they creating employment? So this slide shows us that this is one of a key activity we do in Rwanda. It's done by very few countries, where we do a census of all establishments in the country. We do it every 3 years or so. And what you can see is steady growth in the number of businesses, establishments especially, and the equivalent also growth in employment. So the message is connected. Growth in GDP is driven not only by government activities, no. It's also driven by the private sector, as we see in this. And that comes with employment. And that's the next slide. So if businesses create employment, then we should see the changes in unemployment rate. What we see in this graph is that before pre-COVID, we had unemployment rates between 15 to 17%. Then COVID happened, unemployment rate went very high, to the highest 21, 20. But we see recovery from 2022, where unemployment rate came down to 17.2, and now 2024, 14.9. That's very important. And this is the context then we want to say, what does the ASV tell us? And these are the findings. And I know you want to see the number of poverty, but I want to start by other socio-economic conditions. Because it's very important to say, okay, poverty may change, but how does it align with socio-economic conditions? And I picked a very few of them. For starters, let's look at electricity. It's a basic need, and it's very important to ask ourselves how that change has happened. What we see here is that we've moved from 2017, 34% to 72%, more than double in terms of access to electricity. But when we say overall access, it's very important to say, how does that look urban, rural? Because access could just be in urban areas, but what you will notice is that we have actually more increment in rural areas, whereby from 25 to 65% of households accessing electricity. It's this, we see also increment in urban areas, but we see more significant increment, more than 3 times of access. So that says that the programs being implemented in terms of access to basic services, I think are well targeted. They are reaching the people who really need them. And one other way to look at if access reaches those who need it is to look at access by quintiles. Quintiles is one way in simplicity to look at people's abilities and arrange them from the very low, poor, to those with need. So quintile one means that this will be the very poor, like that, until the ones who are better off in society. And you want to say, are the poor having access to these services? And that for me is very important. If we think the targeting, the reach of these programs indeed reaches them. So what you see is that, as mentioned in rural areas, we see that the poor are the ones who had significant increments. They had significant gains. 44 percentage points increase in the first quintiles. Access to electricity has reached the very poor. That's the takeaway from this. The increments from 9 to 53, the increments from 16 to 62, the increment is happening across 69 to 90, but what matters is these big gains for the very poor. So again, the message is that for access to electricity, overall there's big change, but the change is even more for the poor. So for the next indicators, I will just be saying the same thing. National, urban, rural, quintiles. Now that you know what quintiles are. So then we say water. Water is an interesting one because we've had some gains, but we still have some way to go when you think of access to water. We categorize access to water in terms of piped in drainings, piped in the neighborhood. This piped is what you would consider as wasak and other treated water. This is treated water. And other improved sources include protected springs or boreholes. They are by and large safe. There's an international classification. When you consider what's called improved drinking water source, it considers the piped water and other improved water sources. The combination of the two lead to 90% households use those two sources, the piped and improved water. They use it from 87%, a small increment. Now, we wanted to say, okay, it's one thing to use the improved water, but how convenient, how easy is it to access that water? And what you see here is that of that percentage who use improved water, 68 can access it within 30 minutes. Well, there's another way some countries say, what's the distance? In Rwanda, distance is tricky, as you know, the tail line. It could be short, but it takes you actually more time. So it's more meaningful to think of it from time. And 30 minutes by international standard is considered reasonable, 30 minutes and below. But you see that 21% take more than 30 minutes. So that means they have to make an effort to use this water, but that water is not so convenient to them. The access is, in that sense, we still have some work to do. But we also have 10% who still use unimproved water sources. So some gains, but one would have to break it down and realize that there's work to be done. And the next slide confirms that, because we ask households their level of satisfaction in terms of access to water, and the satisfaction has gone down. In 2017, we had 53% saying they are satisfied. This satisfaction has more to do with how convenient and how reliable. How convenient and how reliable is the water. So now the satisfaction 45%, and that is across all provinces and rural areas. So that's a message. The message is that as much as people can use the improved water, but there's work to be done in terms of making it more close. Well gains, no doubt. Now, clean cooking fuels is another key thing. This is part of the plan of the NST and vision to have more households use clean cooking fuels. Here we still have a long way to go, but there have been gains from 1% in 2017 to 5%, more so in the urban areas, from 5 to 17, really not much in the rural areas. The clean cooking fuels is gas and electricity. Charcoal and firewood is equally the same thing, and has implication for the environment. And so here we still have to do some work in terms of making headways. Another key interesting aspects we look at is households who use cement or tiles as their floor. And you might wonder why that matters. It so happens that if people's well-being is improving, one key thing they want to work on is their conditions of housing. And so over the years we've been tracking that. What we see is that we have a gain from 27 to 39, and more so again in the rural areas, urban not so much, but more so in the rural areas. The message is that well-being has been steadily improving, and that well-being reaches the poor and it's reflected in how they improve their conditions of living. And you can see by the quintiles again, more gains in the lower quintiles, quintile 1, quintile 2. Mobile phone. The Minister of ICT is here. I think this is one slide which is interested to see. Minister, I hope you're not surprised. But when we talk of ownership of mobile phones, what we ask here is, for a household member 10 years and above, is there someone who owns a phone? In some households, there could be more than one person. It could be 3, it could be 4. But what matters is there a phone in the household? And we want to say, the change is quite significant. Amazing where we've come from 64, 70, 67, now 87%. At least there's a phone. In some houses, it could be more. But here we're saying there is a phone in a household. That phone could be a feature phone, could also be a smartphone. Those with smartphones, about 34%. There's still significant gain in terms of 2017. And more interestingly, the gains are substantial when you talk of the poor, quintile 1, quintile 2. That's where the biggest gain has happened in terms of improved access to a phone. A phone is a key thing for households to own, as we'll show in some other aspects. Now, internet use. Minister, here we are talking about internet use, not internet coverage. Internet coverage is over 90, I guess. But here we're saying, did people in the household use internet? It's also a substantial change, almost double the numbers 7 years ago in terms of use of internet at national level, but more so in urban areas than rural areas. And compared to other indicators, the biggest gains here in quintile 4 and quintile 5, which really makes sense in terms of they're more in the urban. So we still have a way to go with use of internet. Could it be a factor of cost? Could it be a factor of awareness? I think it's a combination of various factors. More will be unlocked around this. But that's where we are. So some gains, I think the message is significant gain here, given from where we are coming from. But overall, we still have where to go. Education is key. I know the Minister of Education recently released an education yearbook. What we have is more aligned to what they've looked at. When you talk of gross enrollment means those who are in school at various levels. Here we're talking of primary, irrespective of the age. Someone may be 14 years, 16 years, and that's why we see over 100. In this case, Rwanda, overall Rwanda, we have 140. So efforts to have people in school have paid off, and across male, female. This is gross, meaning we're irrespective of the ages. But look at this. When we speak of primary completion and ask ourselves, those who should have finished primary, meaning they are 14 years and 16 years, had they finished primary? So here we are talking, they were in the households when we were doing the interviews, and we're saying anyone who was 14 years to 16, had they finished primary? It's 42% who had finished primary. So that means a number of them had not finished primary. And it goes by male, female. Interesting that we see more females who finish primary than males. I will leave that in your mind to ask yourself what it is and talk to the Minister of Education to ask why. But moving on, I have this slide here. And Minister Yusuf, it was interesting for us to see this. In terms of cash transfers, and this is something I'm sure the colleagues at BNR and Minicofin will explore more. It was interesting to see that the number of households who had received cash has more than doubled. This is an interesting phenomenon. And it so happens more in the rural areas, but also in the urban areas. And when you look at transfers from abroad, from 25 to 70 billion Rwandan francs, and equally within the country even more, from 53 to 100, almost 3 times. This is an interesting development. You could say, is it more because of the digital uptake of making it easier for people to transfer money? But you could also say, is it a way of our society, people sharing? Because that helps to then safeguard when there are shocks. I think this was an interesting finding that probably could also play into how people were able to sustain in their well-being. So I just wanted to share that. Now here we are with poverty. So poverty. We want to first say how we measure poverty. We establish what's called the poverty line. I won't be technical. All I can say, we look at 2 things. People's well-being has mainly a component of food. People have to eat, and other non-food things like rent, housing, clothing, health, education. But food is key. So we establish what are the calorie needs for a person, and this is where the experts came in. There's a figure we're using over the years, but we realized we needed to improve this, given now the current information. So this is one of the improvements we had. And with those calories, we say, how much does it cost? So the food poverty line, or what's called extreme poverty, has significantly moved from about 105,000 to 356,000. And this is a reflection, obviously, of inflation that we saw. So we want to incorporate the real cost of living. And the poverty line is 560,000 for a person, for an adult equivalent. So when we establish the poverty line, then we say how many people are below that poverty line. That's the way we work out poverty. And those who are below that poverty line means that they cannot afford the basic things. Poverty line is about the basic. For example, food is about having the basic food to work, not necessarily to be so healthy. No, the basic is what we are looking at here. Now, with that, finally, these are the poverty numbers. What we see is that the poverty in Rwanda is 27.4%. 27.4% Rwandans are poor, still a tangible number, but quite a significant decrease from the previous numbers. Now, what you'll see here is I have two numbers for 2017. You remember I said we had to make improvements in the way we were measuring. When you make improvements, you can work backwards using the approach used in 2024 to recalculate the number, the previous number you had. So the number we had at the time was 38.2, which was not significant from 2014. When we calculate this number using the methodology we used in 2024, we get about 39.8%. So then that's what we compare and see the change. We have 12.4% percentage points decrease in poverty, equivalent to about 1.5 million Rwandans. Yeah, I think this is really a big progress, Right Honorable Prime Minister and Honorable Ministers, in terms of how we have come in the last 7 years. And as you can see, the decrease is happening at urban and rural areas, more so in rural areas, from 43.3 to 31.6%. So I could go on and break it down. Extreme poverty, we are moving from 11.3 to 5.4%. That's also the change we've had over the years. Extreme poverty means that these people really lack the basic. They are vulnerable. That's the message. And so with the right targeting, they can be supported. When we look across provinces, and I will show us across districts, we have more high levels in southern and western province. That's where poverty is more, 34 in south and 37.4 in western province. However, likewise also for extreme poverty. However, there's still overall a decrease, but still the highest levels are recorded in these provinces. When we look at district level, the best way to put it is this map, this picture. I think this is my favorite picture because it makes it simple without the numbers. What you see is, yes, again, south, that's where you see more red. Those are districts with poverty rates of 40 and above. And you see more south, and this is where the red was, plus some other regions. But you see a significant change in the color of the two maps. We still have some red here, but overall tending to more lighter colors. That's the image in terms of districts. But I can also break it down in real numbers. When we talk of districts, as we said, the districts with the highest poverty more in southern and western provinces. If you look at those who are above the national average, 16 districts have poverty below the national average. This is really a meaningful, significant improvement. But we have still 14 which are above the national average. Nyamagabe with the highest poverty, about 50% of the population still poor in Nyamagabe. So overall, we have changed, but we still have some significant way to go with some districts. We also looked at the VUP, Honorable Ministers, because the VUP program is a program over the years which, once poverty is known, has been established to say, how do you target the poor and help them come out of poverty? So when you look at those households, we worked with the Ministry of Local Government and LODA to identify those households in VUP and then do a targeted sample of those households. And there are various programs in VUP, but I want you to focus on this overall number. For households in VUP, poverty is at 40.5%. So we can say, if the targeting was good, it's never perfect. It's never perfect. But if it was good, let's say it was good to a level of 70%, meaning 70% of households in the VUP program were poor, then the program has made effect. Because, and I'm here, I'm just saying 70, please don't quote me, I'm not saying that was the target, but I'm just, reasoning and saying, if the targeting was even 70% good, the message is that it has had an effect, because by having poverty now at 40, that means some people who are poor have come out of poverty. And that's maybe the message. More so for those in direct support and financial services compared to other activities. But again, there will be more. There's a VUP report which has details which we'll use to engage with the respective institutions. Now, this is another key indicator that we look at when we are talking about well-being. It shows inequality in a country. And we have the Guineas measured from 0, which would be perfect equality, and 1, which would be inequality. In any society, it's never 0 or 1, so it's in between. What's known is that any inequality level of 0.4 and above is considered high inequality. Anything below 0.4 is moderate. Anything below 0.3 is actually okay. So what we see is that overall we have inequality at 0.37, which is considered moderate, and more so in the urban, more so in Kigali, that's where there's high inequality compared to other regions of the country. To summarize, there is more information we have in all these reports. Most of these reports are ready. We will immediately make them available for people to now engage further. We also plan to do further discussions, workshops. We'll work with our different partners to do these discussions. We'll go into details once we have released these numbers. And in conclusion, what we see is that most socio-economic indicators have improved in the last 7 years. There are some indicators like education, like clean cooking fuel, water, which we still have some work to be done. Poverty has reduced and mainly attributed to improved economic conditions. But we could also add that some key government programs have contributed to this reduction in poverty. And our reflections, there are people who are best placed to digest more of these reflections, but is that one, we need to sustain agriculture, because stable agriculture means a lot in terms of stable prices and people's consumption levels. Also build capacities to mitigate effects of shocks. Shocks will always happen. How we manage those shocks helps sustain the gains we've had. Also create more job opportunities, especially in the rural areas, because we see that when people have employment, they can do better. And continue to expand access to all services. So with that, I want to thank you. I want to thank all the partners that we have worked with. More so, I want you to give a hand clap to my team. They did all this work. The various experts were more complimenting and reviewing. Thank you, Right Honorable Prime Minister.